Thanks very much for the chance to go and address the Gun Rights Policy Conference. I greatly appreciate the Gottliebs for inviting me again to do this. I wanted to first spend a little bit of time talking about some things that I learned while I worked in the Trump administration. I was there the end of last year and up until January. It was only 4 months or so. But I was able to come across some interesting information that I wanted to share with you. There are two general issues that I was able to spend some time that you would be interested in. One is just the background check system. Obviously, I've talked to you all before in the past about errors in the NICS background check system. We have about 3.8 million denials that have occurred that the Biden administration and others have pointed to as somehow stopping prohibited people from being able to go and buy guns. You know that that's not true, that virtually all of those are mistakes, that it's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun, it's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a name similar to a felon from buying a gun. And what has concerned me over the years has been that the errors in the system have primarily harmed some of the most vulnerable people in our society, particularly Black and Hispanic males. The issue is that when you go and you look at roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays, there's a large error rate, and the error rates tend to be among others who have likely similar names. And the problem is that people tend to have names similar to others in their racial groups. Black males tend to have names similar to other Black males. Hispanic males tend to have names similar to other Hispanic males. And you have about 33% of Black males are legally prohibited from owning guns because of felony backgrounds. Well, whose names are their names most likely to be confused with? Other law-abiding, good Black males who want to go and buy a gun to protect themselves and their families. Well, while I was there in the Department of Justice, I was able to see some information on the error rates and how it varies by race and gender. And what you see is that the error rate for Black males is more than 3 times their share of the population. And for Hispanic males, it's something over 2.5 times their share of the population. There's no reason why these errors should be occurring. All you have to do is have the federal government have to meet the same standards for doing background checks that private companies have to meet. Gun control advocates will fight you tooth and nail on that. It really makes you wonder why they push these background check systems. And I guess I've come to the conclusion over time that they view these as features, that they think it's good that you have these types of errors that are occurring. And I think it's particularly tragic because if my research convinces me of anything, it's poor Blacks who live in high crime urban areas, the people who are most likely victims of violent crime, who are the ones who are being stopped from being able to go and have the opportunity to go and defend themselves and their families. Gun control advocates will claim that the reason why you see such low prosecutions for people who are stopped from buying guns, who are being flagged as having felony backgrounds, for example, and being prohibited, is that there's simply not enough resources being put forward to go and do these prosecutions. You look over time, the Obama administration was attacked by Republicans for not enforcing gun control laws. And this was, evidence number one on this, the fact that they don't prosecute people who were supposedly prohibited from buying guns from doing so. Bush was attacked by Democrats for this. Clinton was attacked by Republicans for this. And when I've talked to people, the explanation has been, well, they'd be happy to go and enforce these cases if they were really real cases. But if you get somebody simply because their name's similar to a felon, that's not a real case that you can go and prosecute somebody for. Here's the problem, and that is, in fact, if these were real cases, they would be very easy to prosecute. You have somebody who goes in and provides an ID, a government-issued ID, and it's checked, so you have a particular person who tried to buy it. They filled out the 4473 form, and they made certain statements which are prosecutable under perjury. For example, if somebody was a felon and they filled it out that they weren't a felon, it's kind of hard for them to go and deny. I mean, either they were in jail for 5 years or they weren't. So there's really no way that you can deny that. And it's extremely easy for the prosecutors to go and prove that this was the person who tried to buy the gun. He signed the form, and he lied when he said he wasn't a felon, when in fact he was. But yet you look at the data in 2017, there were 112,000 of these initial denials. There were only 12 prosecutions that occurred federally. There were some state prosecutions, but those are also very rare. So it's hard to go and believe any type of explanation that they simply don't have the resources to go and prosecute more than 12 people federally who went and broke the law. So anyway, it's just outrageous to go and see a system that goes and prevents the very people, law-abiding individuals, who just happen to have names and birth dates similar to others who are prohibited from being able to go and buy guns, to be able to let them to go and buy guns to protect themselves and their families. It's particularly outrageous when we're living in a period of time where police have not been allowed to do their jobs, the police budgets are being cut, where large numbers of inmates are being released or have been released from jails and prisons across the country, where prosecutors in many urban areas, from Philadelphia to Chicago to St. Louis to Los Angeles to San Francisco to Portland and Seattle, aren't doing their jobs and are refusing to go and prosecute violent criminals. And so we have a situation where the very people who live in those types of urban areas aren't being protected by law enforcement, and at the same time are being prevented from being able to go and protect themselves. Now, people can go and appeal these denials, but I've talked to lawyers about this, and you're talking about legal costs that can start around $3,000. Well, somebody may want to have a gun, but they may not be able to afford having $3,000. So not only are you stopping people by race, but you're making it so that poor and middle income individuals are being prevented from being able to go and get a gun to protect themselves and their families. There's another issue that I looked at while I was at the Department of Justice, and that was the FBI's active shooting reports. I have to say both this and the NICS background checks system information, I was not able to go and get this information to be publicly released while I was there, which is a real disappointment. But the bottom line to me is that you have people in government who try to protect the type of information that would go and make the case of gun control advocates more difficult to defend. Anyway, the active shooting reports, just so you know what active shooting cases are, these are cases that range anything from somebody firing a gun in public where nobody is wounded. These are cases not involving any type of crime, other crime, such as a gang fight over drug terps or a robbery. Anything from a gun being fired where nobody's wounded all the way up through mass public shootings. The first of these FBI reports was released in September 2014, shortly before the general election that year. And it got massive news attention. Top of the fold, front page coverage in every major newspaper in the country. Claiming that from 2000 through 2013, there had been a huge increase in the number of these active shooting cases, averaging something like 16% per year average increase. The problem is it was based on very faulty data. There are a number of issues with it. I'll just mention two quickly. One is they used Google News searches to go and collect these cases. Now, you may not know this, but Google News searches tend to drop out news stories over time. That's not a problem when you're talking about mass public shootings where 8 people have been killed, because a week after the event you may find 800 news stories. 5 years after the event, you probably still find 500 or 600 news stories. So it's not something that you really need to worry about. But when you're talking about active shooting cases where a gun may have been fired in public and nobody was wounded, you're lucky to go and find one news story on something like that. So you may initially find a news story, but 5 years from now, that news story may no longer exist. Well, the problem is that the vast majority of these cases where a gun was fired in public and nobody was wounded or only one person was shot, their cases were very heavily represented in just the last few years of their data. Well, that has nothing to do with the fact that there was a big increase in that particular type of shooting. It simply has to do with how they gathered the data there. And it was an artifact of using this incorrect way of going and gathering the data. The other thing was they actually missed a large number of cases where multiple people were murdered. And they missed 20 of those cases, and these overwhelmingly tended to be at the beginning of the period. So if you're using a method of acquiring cases where you're overrepresented at the end of the period and you're missing real cases where multiple people were murdered at the beginning of your period, you're going to make it look like there was a much bigger increase over time than there actually was. The other issue that I looked at was even in their later reports that looked at data from 2014 to 2019, the FBI was missing additional cases. Once those cases are included, what you find is that there were a number of cases, 25 cases out of the 162 that they had there, where people with permitted concealed handguns stopped these active shooting cases. Now, why is that important? Well, if you go and look at the data, what you find is that only 36% of these attacks occurred in places where people were allowed to legally carry guns for protection, where you had right to carry states or constitutional carry states. And so what you find is that almost half of the active shooting attacks that occurred in these places were stopped by people with permitted concealed handguns. That's much higher than the few percent that the FBI was claiming. And again, it was simply a fact of the errors that they had in what data they collected. They missed many cases which perfectly fit their definition of active shooting cases, where people use permanent concealed handguns to stop mass public shootings or other types of active shooting cases. Unfortunately, this FBI data is used very frequently in court cases. It's used by the media. It's used by gun control advocates in testimony before Congress and state legislatures to go and push for their gun control policies that they want to have put forward. So, all I can say again is that the deep state is really real there. And it's definitely real in terms of the FBI's data people that I had to deal with directly or indirectly while I was serving in the Department of Justice. Just as an aside, people will ask, how is it possible that you could go and have the FBI spying on a presidential campaign in 2016 and not have leaks or whistleblowers involved? And I think the answer is pretty simple, and that is if everybody agrees with everybody else politically there, it's not too surprising that the information's not going to be leaked out. And unfortunately, that problem doesn't just exist at the top of the FBI, but at least in the data people that's there, I think it's also a problem that you have there. That if everybody agrees with each other politically and they're way on one side of the political spectrum, they don't really care about the accuracy of the data. And it's something that's made me very concerned about the data that people are able to go and obtain. There's one other topic that I wanted to get into, and that is a data source that's used very frequently by the media in the United States, and I think it's very misleading, the information they put out. What I want to talk about is something called the Gun Violence Archive. These individuals rely primarily on news media stories in order to get everything from information on the number of mass shootings to information on defensive gun use rates. They claim that defensive gun uses are rarely occurring in the United States. And the problem is that the media just uncritically accepts the information that they put out. I looked at the Gun Violence Archive from January 1st of this year up through June 15th. And they show only 581 defensive gun uses. However, 95% of the cases that they have, they derive from news stories. And 2/3 of the 5% that they don't have come from just one source, and that is the Houston Police Department, where they look at police reports that record this. The vast majority of police departments in the country don't provide that additional information. There are two issues that you have with this, at least. One is the fact that what's newsworthy isn't always very representative of what's happening. If somebody uses a gun defensively, merely brandishes it, let's say a woman brandishes a gun, the criminal runs away, no shots are fired, no dead body on the ground, no crime actually committed, it's going to be understandable that a lot of the media won't find that a particularly newsworthy story. On the other hand, if a gun is fired and there's a dead body on the ground, particularly a sympathetic victim, I think anybody who served as news editor would find that story much more newsworthy than they would the brandishing case that I just mentioned. So here's the problem. In reality, we know that woundings are much more frequent than people being killed with guns. They're about 7 or 8 times more frequent. And I would argue, based on some other survey data that's there, that about 95% of the time that people use guns defensively, simply brandishing a gun is sufficient to cause a criminal to go and break off an attack. So in the real world, murders with guns or killings with guns are just a tiny fraction of the time that guns are used defensively. Woundings are much more frequent, but even they are just a tiny fraction of the overall rate that guns are used defensively. But if you look at the gun violence policy, gun violence archive data, what you find is that 42% of their cases involve instances where somebody has been killed. Almost as high a percent involve woundings. And only 11% of the cases involve instances where guns were fired but nobody was hit. And then less than 5% of the cases involve brandishing, but most of those involve cases where the criminal was held at gunpoint until the police were able to arrive. Well, that just has it backwards. In the real world, there's no way that 42% of defensive gun uses involve in killings. And so, you can get a pretty quick idea here that what's considered newsworthy is not a very good, accurate reflection of what's happening out in the real world. You don't have 2% of defensive gun uses simply involving brandishing where the criminal leaves the scene there. And of course, even if one were to rely on police reports, if those were somehow complete by any means, you would have a situation where many people may not even report crimes to police. We know generally that only about half of violent crimes are reported to police. So it's not obvious that the rate that people would use guns defensively, where a gun's not fired and nobody's shot, that those would be reported to police at anywhere different of a rate. So that automatically cuts it down by at least half. Anyway, I appreciate your time today. I hope I've given you some idea of how bad the FBI data has gotten over time, how politicized it's been. And also, when you see the gun violence archive, I hope people will push back and at least warn the media that they should be careful in relying on the gun violence archive, that they have lots of biases in terms of how they define cases. They have higher standards for whether they accept a case as defensive gun use, for example, than they do for whether or not somebody gets killed. But there's a reason why places like the FBI don't rely on the gun violence archive type data looking at news reports, because coroners, for example, who classify a lot of these things, have better information on what actually happened in a crime than the initial news reports have. If anything, the initial news reports may be wrong simply because not all the information is even known to the police at that time. Anyway, I really appreciate your time, and we have a lot that's going on in the world. I hope people will sign up for the Crime Prevention Research Center's email list. You can go to our website at crimeresearch.org. We try to put together a lot of useful information that's there, and we send it out about once every 2 weeks. But it's only useful for people to go and learn the types of things that I've just been going through if they actually know about it. And unfortunately, we have a battle getting this type of information out to people. But I really wanted to thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Jim Irvine, and I'm honored to serve on the board of directors of both the Second Amendment Foundation and the Buckeye Firearms Foundation, where I also co-chair the Faster Saves Lives program. I'm delighted today to talk about public safety. There's nobody opposed to public safety. It's something we all agree could use a little bit more improvement. It's something we all want to see a little better. There's just some disagreement on how we get from here to there. As a kid, when I got my driver's license, I was so excited with the ability to drive and the freedom that that brought me. But I was also aware of the statistics and how deadly cars can be, especially for youth. And so I always wore a seatbelt. Safety has always been a part of who I am and how I live my life. For the past 30 years, I've made my living as an airline pilot. Basically, we take an oversized beer can, throw in a couple hundred people like you, we'll strap on 50 or maybe over 100,000 pounds of jet fuel, and then we'll take off in snow and icing conditions, we'll fly around lines of thunderstorms, and we'll land in visibilities that are so bad that you can only see a couple seconds in front of you. We as an industry do this thousands of times a day, safely. Why? How? Because we understand there are risks, but we learn how to manage them, and we manage them appropriately without letting politics get in the way. That has brought us an unbelievable safety record. We can do the same thing in public safety. Unfortunately, sometimes politics gets in the way. For example, if a mayor demands reductions in sexual assaults, his police chief can just have the officers write more crimes for aggravated assaults and less for sexual assaults. And just like that, the mayor's problem is solved. But it hasn't done anything for our crime victim. It hasn't done anything for you or I. That's always been my driving force. What about the innocent person who's affected by these policies? That is what has driven me into this Second Amendment movement. It's not the guns, it's the safety. I hear people say, well, I wouldn't want a gun in my home because I have children. For me, I wouldn't want to be without a gun because I love my children and I want to be able to protect them. Just as I can't guarantee that no one else will do something reckless, dangerous, or criminal on my drive home, I wear a seatbelt to protect me in the car. And I can't guarantee no one will ever attack me or my family. But I carry a gun, just like the seatbelt. It doesn't guarantee my safety, but it sure greatly improves my odds. You want to improve your odds further? Take training, be practiced, be proficient in your skills, and you have a much better chance of surviving, just like listening to the safety briefing on the back of the flights before departure. Little things we do have a tremendous effect on life and death. Nowhere is public safety more important than in our school systems. This is where the Faster Saves Lives programs can really help out. We put this program together after the Sandy Hook massacre. We were all just torn apart by what happened there. I was fortunate to be associated with two groups of people. One, who wanted to change the world, who wanted to do something, who recognized that these school members, our school staff, over and over and over again put themselves in harm's way to protect our kids, to protect your kids. And all they were asking for was help in a better way. The other group of people I happen to know were people who were professionals in law enforcement, in medical, in psychology, who had devoted their entire lives to understanding active killers, why they do what they do, how they do what they do, and how we can stop them from killing our children. So our groups work together, and that is how the Faster Saves Lives program was born. The FASTER program employs the same methodology that our firemen use to save our kids from fires. Redundant, overlapping layers of protection. It's what I do in the cockpit. It's what our fire people do. It's what our doctors do in the ERs. We have redundant safeguards because every layer can fail, and we recognize that. And we need to recognize it on violence. That's what this program does. First, every person involved in schools needs some training on mindset. That is the most critical thing. This allows people to see problem children and get them treatment, get them to a psychologist, get them some help. You know what? We do a pretty good job of this. We get people who are off the rails through various circumstances back into the fold of society, and they turn out to be great people. That's an awesome success that should be recognized. We also know that sometimes we can't help somebody. But you know what? Our school staff and our law enforcement working together interrupt hundreds, probably over 1,000 active killer events a year because they pay attention, they see signs, and they intervene before event day ever comes. These are 1,000 lives a year easily that are saved in our school systems. Awesome work, and they need to be commended and recognized for what they do. As good as that is, we all recognize it's still not good enough. Almost perfect is not good enough when we're talking about the lives of our innocent children. So everybody can get some training in that. For a smaller subset of our school staff, they need training in medical skills. Now, all of our schools have a fire extinguisher. They have AEDs, and they all need a compression bandage, tourniquets, and chest seals, and people trained how to use them. Trauma injuries happen, and our tourniquets have been used multiple times in school settings and by school staff outside of the school in the community. No matter where those lives are saved, they're important, and that's something that we should be embracing. No one should be opposing treating medical treatment and training with our school staff. It is a job that they have done very well and demonstrated over the last decade. Lastly, firearms. And it's controversial because people don't understand it. No teacher should be forced to carry a gun. No person should ever be forced to do this. It doesn't work, and we know it. And that's not part of our program. And we all know school people who are like, whoa, we wouldn't want that person carrying a gun. Well, then don't authorize that person to carry a gun. But we also know from looking at events over and over and over again that we have school staff members who are going to go to that event on event day. They may not have anything, but they will go there and they will do anything and everything they can to save those kids because the bond is that strong. They will lay down their own lives, not just for their own kids, but for my kid, for your kid. All they're asking for is some training and some tools and the support so that instead of dying for our kids, they live for our kids. They win for our kids. They end the violence before one more kid gets shot. And you know what? That's something only they can do. Law enforcement can't do it. Not because they're no good at it, because they're not there and they can't get there. Law enforcement has no more obligation or ability to stop an act of killing that quickly than they do to stop someone from running a red light and hitting you in a car accident on your way to work tomorrow. They show up later at the car accident, at the act of killing. It's just the timeline on the way it works. We can wish it was different, but we owe our children to recognize the reality of this event and to do something about it. And yes, it is the school's responsibility. The school, not law enforcement, have custody of our children. They have a legal and a moral obligation to protect those children in their custody. So they need to engage in this. In aviation, over the last many decades, we have greatly reduced our accident rate. We've reached numbers that were literally unbelievable when I started my career. We've done it because we didn't let politics drive the debate. We let safety guide our policy and guide how we did things. And it is time that our schools embrace this and realize the reality of it. Our law enforcement keeps changing their policies because when people die on their watch, they don't like it, they change, and they make improvements. Our medical community has reversed what they teach on tourniquets because they don't like losing people on their watch. And our educators need to get in the game and get educated and change their policies and embrace this and make this work. Thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you all next year in person.
Welcome to the Gun Rights Policy Conference. My name is Massad Ayoob. I have the privilege of serving currently as president of the organization. I've been asked to talk to you today about why so many of us in the United States, an increasing number now, not only own guns but carry them. Essentially, it's because this is a nation of practical people and very much a nation of self-sufficient people. Let's go back in time a little bit. If anyone wants to say that carrying a gun in public as a private citizen violates the norm, go back to the time that someone in my age demographic was born, mid-20th century. When I was born, if my parents had asked the family doctor, "Doc, teach us closed chest cardiac massage," which is what they called CPR back then, the doctor would have looked at them like they were nuts and said, "You want to learn that? Go to medical school. That's what we do." Today, virtually everyone watching this knows CPR, along with basic first aid. For heaven's sake, we're seeing Stop the Bleed programs being taught in high schools now. Why is that? It's real simple. Practical people understand the time-space continuum. Someone collapses of a heart attack and the heart stops beating. Somewhere around 5 minutes, if intervention doesn't take place, irreversible brain death is going to occur. How long will it take the emergency medical service to arrive? That depends on wildly varying circumstances, geography, time of day, season of the year, current traffic, current weather. The general average that we hear is 11 minutes. And when you realize they're dead in 5 minutes if we can't save them, it's going to be 11 minutes before the professionals get there to kickstart their heart. Carry the one, it's guaranteed death for the patient. And people figured out, if we can keep that heart beating long enough until the paramedics arrive, we're going to save a whole lot more lives. Going back again, mid-20th century. I can remember as a little boy the giant fire extinguisher in the kitchen that was big, literally bigger than I was, and would come up almost to my waist now as an adult. There were giant cylinders of brass or copper with a hose attached, and you had to take it once a year to the local fire station to get it recharged. As a little boy, I remember the first time my dad took me along for that trip, and the firefighters patting him on the back because he was the only one in the village, except for the firefighters themselves, who kept one of those things in their home. Well, today, I doubt that there's a one of you watching this that doesn't have at least one fire extinguisher in your home, and probably one in your car for that matter. Why? It's the same time-space continuum. The fire flares on the kitchen stove. You have to get to the phone, call for help. The dispatchers have to reach out to the fire service. The firefighters have to jump in the vehicles and head to your house. And if you live in a rural area, it's worse. You may have a volunteer fire department where they have to get on the phone tree, summon the volunteers to meet at the station, gear up, get in the vehicle. And by the time they get to your home, it's burned to the foundation, and everyone inside is dead from thermal burns or smoke inhalation. And society figured out if there's a fire extinguisher right there, you can kill that fire in its nest, and the only damage is you need a new stove, and there's a few $100 in smoke damage. It's exactly parallel with the defensive firearm. I've always taught the defensive firearm is a direct analog to the fire extinguisher. Each of those things is an emergency, life-saving piece of equipment, geared for the first responder to use in a given life-threatening crisis. And society speaks of those of us who served in law enforcement, as I did for 43 years, or the fire service or the emergency medical service, as the first responders. No, we're the first official responders from whatever governmental agency it was. The real first responder is the ordinary citizen who was there when the deadly danger breaks out and has the best chance of smothering it and saving human life. Now let's go back again to the mid-20th century to keep the paradigm parallel. In 1948, when I was born, or 1950, there were at least 7 states where there was no provision at law for a citizen to legally carry a loaded handgun concealed in public to protect themselves or their loved ones. Those states that did have permits were overwhelmingly may issue. That is, the permit would be issued by an authority that had broad, subjective discretionary powers whether or not that permit would be granted. And altogether too often, may issue became a code term for, we'll give you the permit if you're white, male, rich, and politically connected. There was only one state at that time that had what's known today as constitutional carry, the state of Vermont, which never required a permit, merely forbade the carrying of deadly weapons by people who were convicted felons or had been adjudicated mentally incompetent, or in the wording of the law, had malice in their hearts. Now fast forward to now. There is no state that does not have some provision at law for the ordinary law-abiding citizen to carry a loaded concealed firearm in public. Some states make it much more difficult than others, most notably Hawaii, to a slightly lesser degree Maryland, the state of New Jersey, Southern California. Of the remainder of the states, though the states that grant personal permits are now overwhelmingly shall issue. That is, the law requires the issuing authority to grant the permit to the applicant and puts the burden of proof on them to show, if they refuse to grant the permit, to show good cause, that good cause being convicted of a felony, mentally incompetent, etc. Now back in the day, there was only the one state that had permitless carry, the state of Vermont. And maybe society kind of noticed that every year the state of Vermont was among the lowest and often the very lowest in terms of violent crime per capita, with the freest of all gun laws. Today, we now have, as of midsummer 2021, more than 20 states, 40% of the states, now have permitless carry. In the battle over gun owners' civil rights, that has been the battlefront upon which we have made the greatest, most memorable, most life-saving advances. The CDC, during the Obama administration, did a study relating violent deaths to firearms ownership and found out that at a minimum, 60,000 people a year, 60,000 times a year, armed citizens with defensive firearms stopped violent crimes. That was on the bottom end of the estimate. The higher end of the estimate was millions of times. In addition, we live now in a time where, having weathered a long pandemic that's not even over at the time of this video, society has seen police departments decimated by disease, limiting further their ability to respond. We have seen also a time of violent civil disturbance that literally took police response off the streets, and rising demand to defund and limit police service. Not surprisingly, more and more Americans, millions of them in the year 2020 alone during the pandemic, realized how vulnerable that this left them and closed that circle of self-sufficiency in the need for emergency service. Like the fire extinguisher in the home, vis-a-vis the firefighter, like the knowledge of CPR, perhaps even an automatic electronic defibrillator in the home, vis-a-vis the emergency medical service, the increased use of the defensive firearm, including carry in public, has gone in lockstep with the decimation of police service. This seminar you think is about gun rights. I don't believe in gun rights. Guns are objects. They don't have rights. The Gun Rights Policy Conference is about civil rights and above all, about human rights. The great commentator on the common law, Lord Blackstone, said self-defense was the highest of all human rights. Bear that in mind as you attend the rest of the seminar. Thank you for coming. Spread to others who need it the knowledge you'll find here. Thank you.
My name is Patrick Collins, and I am a firearms instructor at Georgia Firearms and Security Training Academy, also known as GA FASTA. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about public safety and how important it is for the Second Amendment to be retained. The entertainment industry and mainstream media are continuously trying to show that firearms in society leads to reckless behavior. I am here to prove that as a misconception. Throughout the years, I have traveled all across the country to teach individuals how to shoot, how to live another day, and how to save lives. I have seen firsthand how being a gun owner can bring peace and tranquility. Firearms in our society have been used to maintain order and counter malicious behavior. When a situation arises, we have the right to defend ourselves. When the lawless seek adventure, we seek peace. With firearm ownership comes a great responsibility, and you are accountable for all of your actions. Criminals prey on vulnerability, and you have the right to defend yourself and your loved ones. Most lawmakers and politicians forget what it's like to live outside of their bubble. They live and work in a very heavily protected environment, unlike the average citizen. They have armed individuals to protect them against threats. We, the people, demand the same. We must not let the elitists win. We outnumber them. We are better than them. We live in reality. The threat is not your average gun owner. We drive peacefully to work. We walk to a convenience store. We buy bread. We buy milk. We buy gas. Our lives should not be at risk. We will not compromise our rights to defend ourselves. There is an old saying, don't start none, won't be none. And that applies to all of us gun owners. At the end of the day, they will blame the object, not the individual. We need to hold the individual accountable. As responsible gun owners, we can do better. We are the ambassadors to the very object that they fear, the gun itself. However, with the right type of training, the right type of knowledge, you will be empowered to live another day. In a legitimate self-defense shooting or defensive gun use, you must prove that your life is in imminent and immediate danger. That is a great responsibility for us gun owners. We must stop those that intend to harm us. Let's normalize the threat of our reaction. Firearms have been in society for many years. We live in a land of unlimited opportunity, and there are those who seek to use firearms to harm us. But one thing we must bring back into perspective: the good outnumber the bad. For those of us that choose gun ownership, here are a few closing thoughts. Seek training. Life is nothing but a continuous educational moment, a sequence of events that happen. Training allows us to make rational decisions when irrational things happen. You are only as safe as the environment you are prepared for. I want to thank the Second Amendment Foundation for the opportunity to speak here at the Gun Rights Policy Conference. Important decisions are being made that greatly impact our safety. I also want to thank you for watching my segment on public safety. My name is Patrick Collins, and I am a firearms instructor. I look forward to seeing you out there.
When I first recognized just how insidious the anti-gun crowd could be with respect to propaganda, rhetoric, and their fake gun narrative, I knew I had to do something to counteract the way they consistently mislead the public on the topic of guns. Their use of terms like assault weapon, for instance. Now, many people may remember Dianne Feinstein bringing the term assault weapon to the public forum. Remember her holding up that AR-15 and teaching everyone the new term and how to use it all the time, as often as possible? Well, what about the term weapons of war? Obama and Hillary used the term weapons of war and really tried to push it into the mainstream. It didn't really catch on like they wanted it to, so it died out for a while. The Democrats brought it back in the hopes of making people fearful that dangerous weapons are in their own neighborhoods, as if these evil things were lurking around the cul-de-sac and just waiting to get you at your backyard barbecue. It was really just a ploy to scare people and get them to support unconstitutional gun laws. By creating this type of fear, the hope of the anti-gunners was that fearful people would vote for the politicians who promised them safety. And of course, Democrats would promise to get these scary weapons off the streets. But first, you have to vote for them. And then you find out that they really have no intention of getting them off the streets in places like Chicago, Detroit, or Baltimore, because every death they can rack up and attribute to these scary guns is one more death they can use to push for more gun control on law-abiding citizens. Now, how about the term high-capacity magazine? There's really nothing high-capacity about 10 rounds in a magazine, but to people who don't own guns and don't know anything about guns, this is a scary term. The stuff like this works, and the gun grabbers know it. Let's not forget the big daddy term of them all. This is the one that's at the center of their anti-gun fear campaign. The term gun violence fuels the fear campaign. It's the go-to term. Without it, people might associate violence with the person who's actually committing the act of violence. We all know that gun violence doesn't exist. There's no such thing as gun violence. What we're really talking about is human violence, but politicians don't want to talk about human violence because it most often reflects poorly on their failed policies. If we were to talk about human violence, we would have to talk about open borders, sanctuary cities, gang violence, gun-free zones, defunding police departments, and the domestic terror groups like the ones that destroyed cities across America in 2020. We can't have that because that would reflect poorly on the politicians who benefit from the violence. And we certainly can't have law-abiding citizens standing up against the violence our elected employees often perpetuate. So the focus is always put on the gun. And what about the new term, ghost guns? Well, ghost guns is the new scary term designed to condition people into believing that guns should have a serial number and should be registered. You'll also notice a push for universal background checks in the pursuit of a national gun registry. Now, in 1791, when the first 10 amendments to our Constitution were ratified, I don't think there was a provision in there for serial numbers so the government could track the guns. Actually, the exact opposite was intended. In other words, government had no business knowing who had guns, where they were located, and they certainly didn't question the reason Americans owned them. They were there to remind the government who they worked for. Now, this terminology created by the gun grabbers is nothing more than propaganda pushed on people who don't know any better. After studying their strategies and marketing techniques, I felt it was a good area for me to get involved in, because if I can understand it, I can explain it, and if I can explain it, I can expose it. Although the strategies and terminology the anti-gun crowd uses are blatant, bold, and often obnoxious, they also use strategies that can be very subtle and many times go completely unnoticed, but still have an effect on the way we think about guns in America. An example of a subtle anti-gun conditioning is the accusation that no one needs a gun, or no one needs more than 7 rounds in their magazine, or no one needs to have a gun on them in public. The implication with these types of statements is that need should be a metric by which we measure our rights. I don't remember it being called the Bill of Needs, but if they can turn need into a requirement for gun ownership, who do you think would be in charge of determining whether or not you need a gun? The strategies used are very similar to marketing strategies that major companies use. For instance, if I said, "I'm loving it," you would know I was talking about McDonald's. If I said, "Just do it," you would think about Nike. By using scary anti-gun rhetoric, the general public develops a fear of guns and a hatred toward gun owners. That's their plan. The goal is to make people irrationally fearful of guns and unjustifiably hateful toward gun owners, all with the intentions of garnering more support for gun control. People are taught to believe that guns are dangerous and unpredictable, and that gun owners are recklessly and intentionally putting everyone in danger by supporting the Second Amendment. It's irrational. It doesn't make any logical sense, but it works. My job is to expose it and show people exactly what they're doing. In other words, expose them in public and let the world see their lies. At the same time, it's important that we gun owners change the narrative and bring it back to an honest, traditional American gun narrative. There was a time in America where guns were cherished by everyone because we all collectively knew how important they are to our freedom. Unfortunately, a portion of our society has been hijacked and misled to believe the exact opposite. I want to change that, and I'm willing to do whatever I can to expose the liars and bring new justice to gun owners across this country. Our founding fathers saw these gun grabbers and tyrants coming over 200 years away, and that's why the Second Amendment was written. I'm Dan Wass, and the Second Amendment is not a privilege. It's our right. It's also our responsibility to protect and preserve it.
Hi there, my name is Nikki Goeser. I'm the Executive Director for the Crime Prevention Research Center. You can visit our website and sign up for our newsletter at crimeresearch.org. I'm also the author of a book called Stalked and Defenseless: How Gun Control Helped My Stalker Murder My Husband in Front of Me. This is sold on Amazon, and you can visit my website at stalkedanddefenseless.com. My husband Ben was murdered right in front of me by a man who was stalking me back in 2009. This occurred in Nashville, Tennessee, at a restaurant that was a gun-free zone. I followed the law, and I left my legal, permitted firearm that I normally carried for self-defense locked inside of my vehicle that night. Of course, the man who was stalking me did not follow the law. He did not have a handgun carry permit, and he brought his gun in illegally. Of course, I realized I was being stalked, so I told management, please help me. This man is stalking me. Can you please remove him? When they approached him and asked him to leave, he pulled a .45 from a shoulder holster up under his jacket. He came up behind Ben, shot him in the head, and then stood over Ben and continued to fire 6 more rounds into him in front of myself and about 50 other patrons in the middle of that busy restaurant with security cameras running. I will probably always wonder for the rest of my life if I could have prevented that. Of course, I'll never know because I was denied a chance. I was stalked and defenseless. Over the past 12 years, I've tried to speak with people about the dangers of gun-free zones and how they leave good law-abiding people completely helpless and vulnerable, while I believe they are a magnet for those with evil intent looking to harm people. That law has changed in the state of Tennessee. I actually worked with the sponsor of the restaurant carry bill after this happened to Ben and I. And that was Senator Doug Jackson. He invited me to the Tennessee State Capitol and told my story on the Senate floor, and they voted and passed the restaurant carry law. So now in Tennessee, as long as you have your permit to carry, you can carry in any restaurant, even if they serve alcohol. You're just not allowed to drink any alcohol. And they're still allowed a posting provision. They can post a no guns allowed sign if that business owner chooses to, but at least it's no longer state law. So I feel like that's a positive step forward where more good people can carry to protect themselves and their loved ones. I want to talk to you a little bit about red flag laws and let you know that I'm completely against them, which I'm sure to some people may seem odd because I am a victim of a violent crime, of a supposed gun violence crime. I just simply call it violence because, let's face it, it's a behavior. It's not an object, and I don't believe we should be focusing on the object. We should be focused on the behavior. I do not support red flag laws. Guns are taken first. You're guilty, and you have to prove you're innocent, which is completely backwards. And that due process occurs last. And you have to pay for an attorney. Let's face it, attorneys cost a lot of money. It can cost thousands and thousands of dollars to hire an attorney to defend yourself, to try and get your rights back. They've already been taken from you. And mental health experts are not always involved. I think there's only a few states where the legislation they have for red flag laws even mentions mental health experts. There are already laws on the books right now across the nation that is an alternative to red flag laws. We don't even need red flag laws. I don't even know why the Biden administration and so many Democrats and even Republicans support red flag laws. I don't want to see that expanded across the nation. I don't think we should be incentivizing red flag laws to be expanded. I think that we need to use laws that are already on the books. An example of that, I'll give you an example out of Florida. It's called the Baker Act. And every state has a similar law to this. They call it different things in different states. And the criteria can be just slightly different, but it's pretty much the same in every state. If you truly believe that someone is a danger to themselves or others, you can have them put on a 72-hour hold. In Florida, under the Baker Act, a mental health expert will evaluate that person. And then they will go before a judge, and the judge has a whole series of options he can choose from. Does the person need to be in outpatient treatment? Is the person truly a danger to themselves or others? Do they need to be involuntarily committed? Should they have firearms confiscated? These laws already exist, and I don't know why more people are not utilizing them. My stalker, I learned during the murder trial that his family and some of his friends and coworkers knew of dangerous behaviors, and no one did anything. They could have Baker acted him. He was living in Florida before he ever came to Tennessee, before he ever showed up in Nashville. During the trial, they said that he had threatened to kill his own secretary at work. He had taken a shotgun and shot at hunters that were hunting next door to his property. They weren't on his property, they were next door. And I think he found like a shell that had landed just across the fence line, and he became enraged and started shooting just over their heads. He should have been arrested at that point. You would hope he would be convicted, and then he would have been a prohibited person. He would have not been allowed to own guns at that point. Apparently, his place of work, where he worked in Florida before he came to Tennessee, he couldn't get along with his coworkers. They were concerned for their safety around him. And so his employer wanted him to have a mental evaluation. Well, he just simply refused. And so they fired him. And then he just walked away out into the world, a ticking time bomb, until he came to Nashville, Tennessee. And, there were signs, and no one did anything. And they certainly could have. So it's not like there aren't options out there. I don't want dangerous people to have access to firearms, but let's face it, even if you take the firearm away, that's not a very serious response. We need to be dealing with the whole person, because they can use a vehicle as a weapon. Knives, baseball bat, a pressure cooker. I mean, we've seen evil people do really evil things with other objects other than a gun. And let's face it, if they truly want a gun, if they're out free in society roaming around, they can get a gun. The same way that people get illegal drugs in this country on the black market. So I think that we need to be addressing the whole person. And if they're truly dangerous, they probably don't need to be out in society. But I do believe in due process, and I think that needs to happen first. And we already have laws on the books to address that. I'll talk a little bit about how red flag laws can impact victims of violent crime negatively. And I'll use myself as an example. After this happened to Ben and I, of course I was depressed. Who wouldn't be? Of course I had nightmares. Who wouldn't? I remember going to bed and thinking, you know what? If the good Lord wants to take me in the middle of the night in my sleep, I am perfectly okay with that, because this is really difficult. Now, did I want to kill myself? No. But you can see how someone might misinterpret that. It could be someone very well-meaning, someone that truly cares about you. But to have my basic human right of self-defense taken from me after going through something so horrific. I mean, a stalker murdered my husband in front of me. I want to be able to protect myself. That's very important to me. And, dealing with depression after something like this, I think that is a normal human reaction that people should be allowed to feel and go through that grief, trauma, and loss and depression process without people automatically thinking, oh, they could hurt themselves. We know they're a gun owner, so we better have them taken from them. That would have compounded the problem for someone like me. It would have been trauma on top of trauma to not be able to protect myself after going through something so horrific. So I think there are real consequences to some of these gun control laws. And I just want you to know that not all victims of violent crime want more gun control. There are plenty of us out there that believe in the Second Amendment, and we want good law-abiding people to be able to protect themselves and their loved ones. And I just want to thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Second Amendment Foundation. You guys take care.
Hey folks, AWR Hawkins, Breitbart News. So glad to be part of the Gun Rights Policy Conference 2021. I don't know how many years I've been part of this. I'm glad every year when the Second Amendment Foundation asks me to take part again. Love speaking to you, love writing on guns, love defending freedom. So thank you for letting me be part of this. I was asked to speak on the relationship between firearms and the media, particularly the biggest story of the year perhaps, on firearms and how the media covered it. And I really have to come to you with two examples, not one. One being a negative example, one being a positive example. And the negative one, by that I mean it's important news that the media will not report, right? Look at Chicago, great example. Chicago at Breitbart, each weekend we cover 70 shot, 50 shot, 60 shot, 40 shot, and among those shooting victims, there may be 12 fatalities, 14 fatalities, 6 fatalities, 13 fatalities. It all varies, but people consistently being shot weekend after weekend, weekday after weekday. And Chicago has a firearm owner's identification card requirement, like the rest of Illinois. You have to get that card before you can buy a gun. And the process for getting that card requires passing a background check. They have a 72-hour wait period like the rest of Illinois. They have a red flag law like the rest of Illinois. Then they have the bonus, because the city is in Cook County, they have an assault weapons ban. These are gun controls that the Democrats promise us will keep us safe. But they're not keeping anybody safe in Chicago. And the media doesn't report it. Look at New York. New York City, we reported at Breitbart, they have a 56% increase in shooting incidents this year compared to 2020. 56% increase. Yet New York has universal background checks, an assault weapons ban, a high-capacity magazine ban, a red flag law, gun registration requirements, and firearm registration requirements, among other gun controls. Again, all the kinds of stuff that the Democrats push at the federal level and tell us will keep us safe. It's not keeping anybody safe in New York City. It's not. But the establishment media won't touch it, because if they report on it, well, by so doing, they undermine the gun control push. Look at Los Angeles County. Look at that. We covered at Breitbart in the first 16 days of 2021 alone. First 16 days, there was a 742% increase in shooting victims. 742%. Yet California has universal background checks, an assault weapons ban, gun registration requirements, a red flag law, a 10-day waiting period on gun purchases, right? They have ammunition controls. They have a ban on campus carry. They have a ban on K through 12 teachers carrying guns for classroom defense. They have all this and so much more. Most of it, as I said already with the other cities, most of it is the very type of gun control that Democrats push at the federal level and promise will keep us safe. It's not keeping them safe. It's not keeping them safe in Los Angeles County, all right? And so to me, this is one of the biggest firearm media stories of the year. It's not what they're reporting, it's what they're not reporting, all right? Because they want to do their part to keep the gun control push alive. It doesn't do any good if President Biden's pushing an assault weapons ban and CNN's going, well, that doesn't work in Chicago or New York City or California. See, that won't work, so they can't cover it, all right? So to me, that is a huge ongoing story, a huge ongoing narrative. Now, if I think about something very positive that happened this year, and it did get coverage. Now, not that the coverage was good, but it did get coverage. the Fourth Circuit's decision against the ban on 18 to 20-year-olds buying handguns. Was that not phenomenal? The Fourth Circuit, led by, in the majority opinion, Julius Richardson, that justice noted that, look, if you look back through American history, there was not a limit that you had to be 21 in order to own a gun or do whatever. And he points to the importance of the age of 18 and how important that was in the minds of some people, and also relies on history as it relates to the militia, and talked about how people who were considered adults, and again, that's going to be your year 18, that those people, able-bodied, were expected to be ready to have guns in case they were called together, called to band together, as James Madison talked about in Federalist 46, call to band together for defense of their town or defense of their nation. And so Justice Richardson kept looking at these things. He's going, look, historically, 18 to 20-year-olds, they're not banned from enjoying these constitutional rights. So they struck down the federal law there, or the rule against 18 to 20-year-olds buying guns. And I should be clear, they didn't strike it down, they remanded it. So it'll go back for more consideration at a lower court. But folks, that's a huge story. Huge, right? I mean, since when does a bureaucrat get to pick which constitutional rights you do and don't get to exercise at age 18? That's what it boils down to. All right, so this is all about freedom. So when I think about the two stories, it's the ongoing failure of gun control in Democrat-controlled cities, and it is the wonderful movement to liberate 18 to 20-year-olds so they can enjoy their constitutional rights, all right? And that movement, as I say, is from the Fourth Circuit. But those are the two stories that popped out to me when I was asked to speak at the Gun Rights Policy Conference. So those are the things I'm covering. And I hope you all have a wonderful conference, and thank you for letting me be part of it.
I'm Beth Baumann here. I want to thank the Second Amendment Foundation for allowing me to be back here at GRPC. It's one of my favorite events of the year. I get to come together with some of the people I admire the most in the industry who are working to fight the good fight. And so again, just thank you for including me in this. I always am so incredibly honored that you believe that the work I'm doing is important. So thank you. As you all know, we're talking about media today and what the media does and how they cover stories. And that kind of leads into the first point. I would argue that we have two really big stories that have taken place this year. The first one being the 8 million new gun owners who have joined our ranks, and so incredibly excited about it. I know we're happy that more people are deciding to utilize their right to keep and bear arms, although it can be a bit frustrating, especially given the ammo shortage. Trust me, I know on that one. But I'm so glad that so many people are realizing that their right to self-defense at the end of the day is in their own hands. I believe that a lot of that has to do with a combo of things. The pandemic in combination with the George Floyd riots, and let's call them riots because that's what they were. Some people were peaceful, but I saw firsthand what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I visited the aftermath and saw how this small town was completely destroyed by looters and rioters who burned down and destroyed a city. And people, especially in flyover, maybe people who wouldn't traditionally be interested in firearms or never really thought they had a need to protect themselves, that the police would be enough, they're really coming to realize that at the end of the day, their self-defense and their ability to protect themselves, their loved ones, and their family ultimately rests in their hands. Look at Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We saw it in all these very small towns. It was no longer just an inner city problem. This became something that suburban women especially woke up to. People of color, it's not just old white men like they always make it sound to be. And it is such an amazing and exciting opportunity, not just for those of us who fully believe in this right and defend it with our whole hearts, but it's also an opportunity for us to really explain why we are so passionate about this. This has nothing to do with a piece of metal or living life in fear. It's about being empowered and making decisions and not believing that everything can be left up to law enforcement. The other aspect of this too is, we had the left come in and really demand this defunding of the police. Some of them will call it reimagining the police, but let's call it what it is. It is completely defunding and getting rid of the police. And if you're like me and you live out in rural America, it can take the sheriff 20, 30 minutes at best to come when you need them. And so you rely on yourself and your neighbors and your family to protect you. And people have really realized that, and I'm so thankful for that. But it's interesting to watch and see how the media portrays this phenomenon. They make it out to be as we're preying on, low-income people or people of color, or we're brainwashing them. They have all of these narratives and talking points, and I think they can really honestly be traced back to Everytown and Moms Demand Action and Giffords and all of these anti-gun activists. And the reason is simple. I think we saw it pretty remarkably a few days ago when talking about David Chipman, who, as you are probably well aware, is President Joe Biden's pick to lead the ATF. He's not just an anti-gunner. He's not just someone who has advocated for disarming and completely dismantling the Second Amendment, but he is literally a gun control lobbyist. He has made millions as a registered lobbyist on behalf of Everytown and Giffords. And recently when Stephen Gutowski at The Reload talked about Chipman and racist remarks he made while as an ATF agent, Everytown and Giffords and Fred Gutenberg, one of the Parkland parents, and a number of other people jumped on Twitter and instantly discredited everything, or attempted to discredit, I should say, everything that Gutowski wrote about because they didn't like that their nominee was being attacked. But we saw that it was just a regurgitation of talking points. And you know how we know? Their grammar was off. Pedal and pedal. Yeah, apparently those of us who believe in the God-given right to self-defense and self-preservation are somehow, a rag or extremists. Our founding fathers put the Second Amendment in the Constitution for a reason. They wanted us to have the ability to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government should the need ever resist. And if you look at the number of countries, Venezuela is a perfect example. Cuba, Nazi Germany, what do they do first? They always disarm their populations. Because if you disarm a population, they can't fight back against control. And that was precisely what our founding fathers were worried about. And the media plays into this talking points. I would not be surprised if these reporters who cover mass shootings or anything even remotely related to guns receive talking points, because they use the same old, tired, so-called facts that really generally are never truly facts, and they peddle them. And the heart of the issue is they don't understand guns. And I would argue that that is the single-handed most important thing that is wrong with the media today is they sit here and tell us that we have a gun problem, that we're obsessed, that we're crazed. We saw it in a recent Washington Post editorial about how all of us gun nuts are just paranoid and crazy and overly sensitive. No, we get angry because when you talk about things like full auto and semi-auto, there's a difference. And those terms matter when we're talking about legislation, when we're talking about what should be banned, what should be legal, what should be illegal. And these reporters that write these stories don't take the time to learn the basic terminology, learn how a firearm functions, and know the ins and outs of obtaining one. They say things like it's easier to buy a gun than to vote. I don't know about you, but I have never ever needed to give my social security number. Actually, here in Idaho, I have had to give an ID, so there's one and one. Need an ID for both. I didn't have to give my social security number to vote. I didn't have to get a background check. Voting, and never requires a waiting period like some states, like California, do. And they peddle these things because that's what they're told is the truth. They don't do any investigating of their own. They don't know the facts surrounding it. They just regurgitate whatever they're told by these so-called these so-called fact checkers and communications directors and those who create talking points at gun control groups. And the media coverage that we receive has been absolutely abysmal. Things are getting slightly better, and part of that is because there are so many great people like the Second Amendment Foundation, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, Gun Owners of America, who are going out there and talking to the media and explaining why things are important. So just remember that whenever you read something, look at it with a fine-tooth comb and know that this comes from a place of ignorance. We can and we will get through this. We just have to keep pushing forward. Good luck and God bless.
So last year at GRPC, I was the recipient of a t-shirt that said, "I want to be like Amanda Suffecool." And I'm not often speechless, but I was speechless. But it really got me thinking. I want to be like a lot of you, a lot of the Second Amendment folks that are doing amazing things, fighting for freedom, fighting for the Second Amendment, fighting for our country. And there's different ways to fight for that. There are different ways. And it doesn't discount the police and the EMS and the military, but you guys are fighters and you're doing amazing things. And I want to talk about some of those amazing things. So I have to start with a Betty White quote because Betty's my gal, and those of you who've been there for a while kind of get it. Betty White says, "I've been around the block. I've seen a thing or two. I've even done a thing or two. I know a few things, but not much, but some." And that's me. I know some things. I know some Second Amendment stuff. But more important, I know you. I know the people who do amazing Second Amendment things. And I want to do a shout out to you because of those things. So in the Second Amendment, there are things that we all can do, should do, are doing. But then there are some people who are doing over and above amazing things. So let's just talk about random acts of kindness. The kindest person in the Second Amendment world is Robin Sandoval. She just is. I could be kind if I thought about it. But frankly, I don't think about it. She's just kind all the time. So I want to be like Robin Sandoval. I really do. Let's talk about energy-driven, motivated, moving on. That would be Rick Ector. Do you know that he's got a target goal of 1,500 women that he wants to introduce to firearms? 1,500 in a single day. Well, he had to expand it to 2 days because there's only so much Rick Ector to go on. So let me just say, me too. I want to be like Rick Ector. There's that. Safety-minded Second Amendment folks. Have you seen the Guns 101 videos that Paul Lathrop and Rob Morris put together? Not just them. They lined up a whole bunch, of you guys. 101 safety videos for new shooters to introduce them to all the things that they would get from an instructor if we weren't in COVID lockdown. So new shooters are growing and they can't get to the instruction that they need. So they switched to a whole new way of sharing that information. Guns 101. I want to be like them. So me too. Willingness to share. The names, that list of names is huge. And if I start naming them, I can't stop. So just plan on the fact that I want to be like you. Because if I pick up the phone and I call you, you're like, what can I do? How can I help? Who can I introduce you to? What can I tell you? How can I share this information with you? That is it. So I want to be like you. I really do. In this world, it's crazy, but it's your outlook that really matters. Your point of view. Life is tough. It takes a pounding. But our ability to stand back and see where all this ends, I don't have it. I don't know that you have it. So we're in there, we're fighting, keep fighting, and then look in the mirror and say, I want to be like you because you're fighting the good fight. Thanks.
Having been on a media fast for the past 3 decades, I must admit that it's not the easiest task for me to argue what the most important 2A story in the last year might be. However, I have been paying attention. I have been researching and listening. And I believe there are certain themes and topics that seem to consistently come up, whether hiding in the background or staring us full in the face. And one of those subjects involves gun control laws. It seems we are never safe from the next politician posturing or posting about their ideas to make us all safer by making it harder for good people to purchase, own, and train with firearms. And with the looming threat of yet more legislation that targets, limits, and even criminalizes law-abiding gun owners, all of this has me wondering if and when they outlaw guns. Will we be outlaws? Uncomfortable conversation or not, I think responsible gun owners need to come to terms with some important truths. We've been told for a long time that no one's going to come to take your guns. But the current administration has announced multiple extreme gun control actions that could require law-abiding citizens to surrender lawful property and push states to expand gun confiscation orders, actions that could criminalize us gun owners. And of course, this has all happened before. And I can't help but think of what occurred to family, friends, and citizens of the United Kingdom not so long ago. In fact, I recently spoke with a friend and fellow instructor who hails from the United Kingdom about these very concerns. Although he was in grade school and high school when several of the pivotal instances occurred, he recalls the events that led to the disarming of law-abiding gun owners in England. In 1988, the British government passed the Firearms Act, which banned semi-automatic rifles above .22 caliber. Then, in 1997, they really kicked it into high gear after the Dunblane massacre, a school shooting in which 16 students were killed. My friend explained that all handguns were gone in about 6 weeks. But no one pushed back. No one said, no, that's just not the British way. The people just rolled over and gave up all their guns. Of course, there was a gun registry at that point, so it was very easy to know where to go, pick up the guns, and get rid of them. Interestingly enough, statistics show that England's gun bans did not reduce firearm-related crime. In fact, for a time, the crimes involving guns increased. There were 4,000 plus gun-related crimes in 1998, and in 2005 there were 11,000 plus. And now, almost like a real-life parody of common sense gun control measures, the UK is working to ban knives, since knife-related crimes and stabbings have been on the rise. Now, We might chuckle and shake our heads at this madness, but the thing is, America too could be on a similar path. Over the years, law-abiding gun owners in the United States have endured as little by little our right to keep and bear arms has been infringed. We have already seen various accessories and gear, types of guns, and magazine capacities become banned. And with more and more gun control comes less and less freedom. So what happens if and when they do come to take our guns? Have you thought about what you will do? Have you made a decision, and have you come to terms with it? Many people in the firearms community refer to the mysterious boating accident in which all firearms were lost. But we all need to seriously consider our real course of action. And that's why America must do something now. If we continue to compromise or try to ignore the attacks on the Second Amendment, if we sit back and simply hope that someone else will contact representatives, influence others, and make their voices heard, we may eventually find ourselves with nothing left. No more normal capacity magazines. No more AR-15s. No more semi-automatics. No more handguns. Soon, the firearms and the options to protect what we love could be gone. Just like that. I realize that this can be a tough decision, but remember why we have the Second Amendment in the first place: to protect us from a government that would choose to infringe upon our right to keep and bear arms. Consider what Thomas Jefferson wrote. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. Or what about Martin Luther King Jr.'s comment in his famous letter from a Birmingham jail? One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. So comply or not. Become an outlaw or not. Whatever you choose, be sure to weigh the risks and the benefits and be prepared to face the consequences. And don't wait for someone else to speak for you or to do something for you. The world all around us, especially over this last year, has shown us countless defining moments that prove why the Second Amendment and our individual right to self-defense is so important. It's time for the 2A community to wake up, get moving, and stay passionate. Our lives and our liberties are on the line.
Hello, everyone. It's good to know that you're out there. I can't see you since we're doing this virtually, but I wish I could, and I'm sure every speaker who has presented to date has probably said that in one way, shape, form, or another, that we wish that we all could be with you together in person like we used to. But we've done this for a couple years now virtually. But I think in 2022, the tide will have turned and we will be back together again, gathering in some locale with hundreds of you in person and thousands, if not tens of thousands of you online watching this excellent conference. I want to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me and allowing me to speak once again. I have truly enjoyed my long association with the Second Amendment Foundation and the Gun Rights Policy Conference. And I'm grateful for all that they do, for Alan and his staff and everyone for the great work that they have done for such a long period of time. As for the topic, I want to talk about the news media. Big surprise, right? I'm from accuracy in media. I've only studied this for about 40 years. But it is amazing to me as we look down the line here and we look at what's been going on in the media. I was asked to think about, talk about what the most important 2A Second Amendment story was in the last year and a half or so. And as I looked and I thought about it, I thought, is there really one story that's more important than another? I tend to think that they are all very important for those of us that are interested in the Second Amendment, interested in gun rights, and the ability, our right to preserve our liberty and our freedom, right? So as I want to kind of cobble together a few things and just kind of make you think, or at least throw out to you some ideas about how we came to where we are today and what has the media been doing, particularly since the pandemic. The pandemic may have shut down the country for a period of time. It altered our lives probably in ways that we never imagined, and probably forever in many, many fashions. How many people are going to go back to work in the office on a permanent basis? Are you going to live in a remote part of the country and then work from work from your home office and never set foot in an office? How many rallies and other types of meetings will take place in the future, is still debatable. And how many people will actually attend those meetings is probably still debatable. But I think there is a pent-up demand to return to some sense of normalcy, and we will see a lot of the things that we knew back pre-pandemic once again come to pass. Now, for the news media, they didn't really skip a beat, right? They covered the pandemic. They excoriated President Trump. And they pumped up then Vice President, former Vice President Biden, now President Biden, even though we saw very little of him during the campaign. But it didn't stop the news media in their reporting. And I want to kind of posit to you that, as far as stories go with relation to the Second Amendment, that you can look at some turning points in this country that fueled more anti-2A sentiment, helped the Democrats to a certain degree, probably definitely helped Joe Biden. I'm definitely convinced of that, win the election. And that goes back to, the death of George Floyd, kind of a flashpoint in America, a lot of attention, spent there. I mean, part of this too is that, the news media, what are they going to cover? They're going to cover the pandemic. They're going to cover people sitting at home, maybe a lot of other things, but they also needed to find other news. And this became big news. Then also the death of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, also, combined with that, and you had kind of the 1-2 punch that the liberal left, the far left, needed to kind of energize their forces and their troops. And I think there are a lot of people who were part of this movement that were fighting, for social justice reforms. They wanted, down with police brutality, defund the police, all of these things that occurred. I think this is definitely something that was, fueled and saw more spark, by these incidences, right? And we saw riots in Seattle and Portland and other parts of the country. We saw Black Lives Matter after several years of really not doing anything, getting revived and getting put into the, front stage there, right, front and center, there in the news media, and getting lauded for all the things that they were doing, while all the damage that their people were causing, though they tried to say that that was not part of their group, but it was part of their group, right? They still associated themselves with that. The demonstrators thought they were, causing $600 million of damage at the very least in this country, property damage. You may have even think about it here with one incident of this is Al Velshi of MSNBC was reporting on this. In the background, buildings are on fire. People are running around, carrying stuff that they had looted. Hello, news media, right? Let's pick up on the story and let's cover the truth. And he had the incredulity to say that, everything was peaceful. It's peaceful when there's a building burning behind you in the background. Are you tone deaf? What is this? Anyways, but you cobble together these types of things. And what it did is that it helped bring people out, and it put people out and helped activate people to go to the polls. There were a myriad of reasons that people turned out heavily for and voted for Joe Biden. Donald Trump got a record number of votes as a Republican, right, for president. But it turns out that Joe Biden somehow got more, okay? And so he is in the Oval Office and he is the President of the United States. That may not be pleasing to many of us, but that is what has happened here, and we have to live with those consequences. But what has happened here is that it has also emboldened, as a result of this, liberals, particularly the far left, to go and try to push through some gun legislation. They figure that with control of Congress, with technical control, with the vote of the vice president in the Senate and control of the White House, they have, total control now, and they can do whatever they want legally, willy-nilly, with regards to legal, gun rights and gun laws and things like that. Actually, though, reality has come to kind of bite them a little bit on this, right? Because even though the House has tried to pass some legislation about loopholes, and at gun shows and other things like that, and background checks, it hasn't gone anywhere, right? Thankfully, they haven't gone anywhere because the Senate is 50-50, and not every senator is going to vote in lockstep here on some of these things that they think they even feel are not constitutional. Now you take that and you throw into the mix also that we have a Supreme Court that is much more conservative than it has been in the past, and challenges that will be brought before the Supreme Court about unconstitutional gun laws. I think we're going to see a massive turn here going forward as a result of this. 2022, that looms on the horizon. That is extremely important for the 2A movement because you have Democrats that are in generally a lot of Republican districts, and they won by the skin of their teeth in a lot of cases. The Democrats did lose ground, right, in 2020, and they could lose a lot more ground, enough ground that Speaker Pelosi will not be Speaker Pelosi, come January 2023, right? So if you think about this, all these things kind of they morph into this big overall story about how the Democrats thought that getting all of these issues together, trying to put together, social justice, police brutality, defund the police, talk about that. Then what happens there too? We have the cases of crime spiking in a lot of liberal cities and where there was already gun control. And what are they doing now? Those liberal mayors, they're trying to point the finger at Republicans for actions that were taken that caused that, or the courts for not prosecuting enough people. It's like, give me a break here. I mean, exactly what are they trying to say and do here? It's mind-boggling as to what is going on here in this country with regard to this. But I think the outlook is very good. As I said, the Supreme Court, I think, you're going to see some rulings here that will be very favorable to the Second, Amendment and the 2A movement. If you're looking for places to look for news, I think most of you out there are probably pretty well versed with that. But I do want to give you some bit of advice here with this, is that do not always just wrap yourself around in conservative /2A, pro 2A websites and news organizations and things like that. You need to get a little bit of the other side in order to be able to find out what they're doing and put together a reasoned argument. So think about that. Learn from the other side too, and you will be a much better news consumer and much better prepared to argue about 2A with your friends and others that need to hear the message out there. All right, my time is up. Thank you so much. God bless America, and we will see you again next year in person.
Hey, welcome back to Arms Room Radio, coming to you live weekly from Location Bravo. We promise to bring you all things gun, all the gun time. My name is Mike, and what? We're not doing the radio show? I thought we were doing a radio show. Crap. All right, hold on. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of The Rundown, where we bring you daily 2A views and conservative news. I am your co-host today, Mike Piwowarski, and what? What do you mean? I thought we were doing the rundown. Well, we are just all kinds of screwed up today. Crap, hold on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Gun Rights Policy Conference. My name is Mike Piwowarski. I'm the host of Arms Room Radio and the co-host of The Rundown. Special thanks to everybody at the Gun Rights Policy Conference and the Second Amendment Foundation, Mr. Gottlieb, Julianne, Jennifer, Dave, Andrew, Winston, anybody else I'm forgetting, I apologize. But it's always a privilege to be asked to be back here again. Folks, this year I've been asked to talk to you about major Second Amendment events in the media and how that has helped shape what's going on today. Well, I think I could break this down into a couple of different easy ways for us to remember. The first one being, let's just go with, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's break them down that way. Let's jump right into the good. I think the best thing that's been covered by the media and that has occurred for the Second Amendment has to be the last three justices, including Justice Amy Coney Barrett, appointed to the Supreme Court. Now we all know what this means. This means we went from a court that we were afraid to send Second Amendment cases to because we did not know what the outcome would be. We know that Chief Justice Roberts became much more of a swing vote rather than a rock solid conservative. So it was very, very tenuous to send things to them and have things decided upon. So things just didn't go to them on purpose. Our good friends at Second Amendment Foundation and other organizations all around the country would not send things forward because we did not know what would happen. Well, President Trump appointed Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett to the Supreme Court. And now there's a clear majority of conservative justices. So this is probably the best thing that has happened to the Second Amendment. And we all know that there's a number of cases pending before them right now, and it does not look good for the opposition. So we can just continue to press forward and move with a skilled pace at countermanding some of the left's gun control policies. And we look forward to all of those coming out. Also, part of the good that we see is that President Trump's, again, additional appointments to the federal judiciary. He appointed over 200, I think the number was 226, if I recall correctly, total federal justices that went towards different levels in the federal judiciary. These are all lifetime appointments. These were all very conservative individuals. These were all younger individuals. These were all individuals, 40s, for the most part. So they are going to be with us for a minimum of one generation, if not two. It seems that these justices seem to live a pretty long time. So that's great news for the Second Amendment. That's going to be a very, very long-lasting effect that we're going to see inside the Second Amendment community. There were, I believe, 54 justices appointed at the very high, the federal appellate level. Now, there are many districts around that went from strong Democrat control to being flipped completely and now strong Republican control. We're even seeing cases coming out of the Ninth Circuit out west where many, many people are surprised at what's coming out of there. They're becoming more and more conservative, and not all the way. Don't take it for granted, but there's definitely more conservative views coming out of the court in the Ninth Circuit. So I think that about covers it for the good. Those are some of the most incredible things that we've seen happen, at least in my lifetime, for Second Amendment rights. Things are continuing to roll forward. I think we're going to see a lot of rights given back to us by the courts over the next couple of years. Now let's go on to the bad. Well, listen, President Trump did not get reelected, and there's some people out there shaking your head right now. Well, I apologize. I was a President Trump supporter, and I believe that the election was stolen, but we won't even go into that. We're just going to go on to the ramifications of him not being in office. For those that didn't vote, listen, again, apologize for the bluntness. You were wrong. You didn't vote for President Trump. You had your options. You had the option of somebody who would vote for gun rights and somebody who you knew guaranteed was going to take your gun rights away from you. You don't like the bad orange man's tweets. Oh, well, you got to get over it. Again, he's no longer the president, and this is what we have to face. Everybody thought we'd hold the Senate, and it did not. It's 50-50. So with the election of Biden, now we know where the Senate stands. So this is the bad. This is the bad. We lost the presidency, and I want to tell you that next time you have to vote, to remember voting has consequences. You're never going to find the candidate you agree 100% with. If you do, share the wealth, let everybody know so we can move them to higher office. We want them so we all can get along. But you're very rarely ever going to find that 100% person you agree with. In the military had something we call the 80% solution. That's a good plan now is better than the perfect plan tomorrow. Would you rather have somebody in office that you agree with 80% of the time, or not vote or vote for the opposition because you got hurt by some tweets, and now you've got somebody that their gun policy is 100% against what you think? All right. The good president now is better than the perfect president tomorrow. That's what you have to take. Otherwise, you'll end up with nothing. Don't get me wrong. I'd love the perfect. I'd love the 100. They don't exist. They don't exist. There's always going to be a disagreement. Just look in your own household. I'm sure it's your spouse, you don't get along 100% of the time. And if you do, God bless you. You're very fortunate. So that's That, I believe, is the bad. We no longer have the president, and we have to deal with the current administration. So you have to be on guard. You have to watch what's going on. You have to pay attention locally, because everything that starts locally ends up at the larger community level, at the state level, and at the federal level. It's now important for you, even if you're in that red state stronghold, to watch everything that happens so you can be aware and be alert and respond accordingly. All right, let's move to the ugly. And this is one that's troubled me for a little while. I've seen this come around. I'll thank the proper people here for bringing us a knowledge of co-opting of language. All right. And that was our good friend Alan Corwin that I believe brought that to everyone's attention, that talks about stealing the language. What are these words that we hear all the time? We hear like assault rifle. It doesn't exist. We know it's not real. A ghost gun. What is that? Is that something that flies around a room and use boo at you? These are words made up by the left, made up by the media, made up by the gun control groups to make you think bad thoughts about firearms. Well, the most recent one that's out there, and this troubles me a lot. I hear things and I hear these words and these terms all the time. The gun community or the gun culture. Well, let me tell you something. Let me set you something straight here when it comes to the gun community. I don't care about the gun community. I'm not in the gun community. I'm in the Second Amendment community. I'm in the Second Amendment rights community, and that's where I am. I'm here to fight for my Second Amendment rights, to fight for your Second Amendment rights. This whole co-opting of the term gun community is the left trying to encompass all of us on the right, trying to include themselves in our conversations, trying to force themselves into our policy decisions. This is our gun rights policy conference, not theirs. I don't care for this term gun community. And as far as I'm concerned, you can take it and throw it out the window. There is no gun community. There's the Second Amendment community, and then there's gun owners. Is there crossover? Absolutely there is. Are there Second Amendment advocates that don't own a gun? Well, absolutely. They might live in one of those jurisdictions where you can't have a firearm, but they're still Second Amendment advocates. What's a gun owner? And we've seen plenty of new gun owners come around. And I think we've seen a number of new gun owners come to the Second Amendment community after having to go through the ordeals they've had to purchase firearms over the past year and a half in states and communities where they couldn't have them, where they had to jump through incredible hoops. The gun community is not a real term. Stay away from it. Watch out for the charlatans that wear the Second Amendment badge and try to convince you that we're all going to come together, sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya and find compromise. The left doesn't want compromise. The idea of the left, their idea of compromise is they want all of your gun rights, but they're willing to take half of them now and then half of them next legislative cycle. There is no compromise. Sit back, tie up your boots, pull up your pants, and fight for your rights and fight for the Second Amendment and stay with us. Hey, and check me out. Second Amendment rights, we got it for you every day. armsroomradio.com, and check me out on therundown.com. Thank you for joining us at the Gun Rights Policy Conference 2021, and we'll see you next year.
Hey guys, Steve Gutowski here. Glad to be with you again this year at GRPC with a new outlet now. It's called thereload.com. I founded it a few months ago. Everything's going really well. If you haven't checked it out yet, make sure you do. But I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about guns and media with you guys, trying to give a few insights from my experience as a reporter working in the DC area covering guns, and now as a founder of my own publication focused on gun policy and politics. Hopefully I can have something to say that will be interesting to you guys. Certainly I still believe that most reporters want to get things right, and that it is oftentimes in your best interest to work with them as best as possible, unless you know already that they have a bad reputation or not going to treat you fairly. I would say go ahead and try your best to work with them and perhaps even educate them. Oftentimes the main driver of mistakes in gun reporting is ignorance, frankly. It doesn't reflect well on reporters generally. I would say that that's the main driver, but I really do think that it is, and that they will more often than not listen to you if you can tell them what's true and what's not, and you can demonstrate that to them with evidence and facts and so forth. But beyond just talking to reporters and being involved in stories, which is one way that you can help better inform the public on guns and gun politics in America, you can also, of course, have an impact by writing your own stories. And that is now easier than it's ever been. And I'll give you a little bit of my own experience doing that. Of course, I've worked for the last decade or so at various publications in DC as a reporter, as an employee, with, the last almost 7 years, I believe, at the Washington Free Beacon, which was fantastic. I was able to do a lot of great work there, and they're a wonderful publication. But in the last few months, I've started my own publication, The Reload, and had great success with it, and shown, I think, especially just recently with a major story that I broke on ATF nominee David Chipman and some allegations of racism against him that exist, as well as other ATF agent complaints about his conduct and his points of view and how they could hinder their ability to carry out their jobs as field agents. It shows what can be done, I think, by somebody who is motivated and committed to producing quality firearms journalism from a point of view that's actually informed on the topic as well, not just somebody who follows the traditional rules of journalism, which is an important thing to do if you want to break news stories and have an impact like that, but also somebody who knows what they're talking about, who has shot guns before, who understands how they work and understands why people own them and what they use them for, beyond just criminals who use them for bad things, right? So I think the audience is probably filled with a lot of people like that. People who are watching this video right now, there's probably a lot of you like that. And you look at the media atmosphere that exists now, you see a lot of misinformation, certainly, that's out there. And it's frustrating, I imagine, for most people who know about guns when they read a major media article about guns and there's a lot of stuff in there that's not true or just doesn't make any sense, frankly. It can be very annoying, certainly. I know it annoys me when I see that. But the good news is that now, more than ever before, you can have an impact on that kind of thing, not just by criticizing the stories that are wrong, although that is valuable, frankly. If you can point out why something is wrong and how it should have been written to be more accurate, that's valuable. But you can also produce your own stories. You can tell stories that aren't otherwise going to be told in the first place at these major media outlets, because that's another form of bias that exists that's perhaps even more pernicious than just outright falsehoods being put into a story. If you don't cover a certain topic and it never gets written about at all, that has a detrimental effect as well to people's understanding of what's true and what's not. And this Chipman story that I published is a great example of that. These allegations surfaced about a month ago, about a month before I looked into them, but I was the only one who was able to find ATF agents who were willing to talk about the allegations and corroborate whether or not they even existed, right? To do sort of the basic reporting on it. That didn't get done anywhere else at any of these major publications. And that shows the need, I think, for my publication in particular. The Reload hopefully demonstrates some need for that, but also the need for more reporting like that from people who know what they're doing and who are willing to go and look for and research stories that aren't otherwise being told. And with the internet and with the rise of some of these platforms that you can actually make money off of journalism now in a way that wasn't possible, 10 years ago, with something like Substack, for instance. I know there's several good writers in the gun community on Substack, like Lee Williams went over there. What I'm doing is similar to Substack in the basic business model. And it's something you don't have to do as a full-time job, of course. It's something you can do on the side, and you can start your own Substack for free. they make it very easy over there to set up a whole publication for free and then make money without having to even put any money into it beyond your own, the money spent on your reporting and your time, of course. But it's really open to everyone now. And so that, I think personally, that if you want to have an impact on people's understanding of guns and gun culture and gun policy and politics, then the best way to do that is through original hard news reporting, because there's only so many people, there's only so many times that the same sort of talking points can be, yelled back at people who already agree with them. And it's not going to have as much of an impact as breaking an important news story. Commentary is important. Opinion is important. It's important to have smart people discussing issues and sharing their views of things. But it's also very important to break news, to tell stories that aren't otherwise being told. And we have far less of that out there in the gun community than we do the former. So my encouragement for you is to go out and start writing your own stories. If you know anyone, if you know of any stories that are interesting, that you can back up with facts and quotes and evidence, then you should do that. You should start writing. I know that's kind of, maybe you'll be kind of competing with me to some degree, but you can also contribute to the reload if you'd like. If you have something that's high enough quality, you got a piece that you're interested, you got a story you want to tell, reach out to me. I'm interested in publishing other people who want to do this. So, but otherwise you can do it yourself too. And I would encourage you to do that. But, that's what I wanted to say. I think the reload's been successful at it so far. I wouldn't expect, everyone to immediately be able to do this for a living. I've spent the last 10 years building up this beat for myself, but it doesn't mean that you can't get there eventually too. And it's easier than ever to start. So why not? Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to me. Hopefully I've given some inspiration to some people. And hopefully next year I'll be able to come and see you guys in person and talk to you one-on-one and speak to you in the flesh. We'll see. All right. Have a good one.
Hey, thanks to Alan Gottlieb and all of the organizers for the Gun Rights Policy Conference for the invitation. I'm glad to be speaking to you today virtually as we gather together in support of our right to keep and bear arms. So my name is Cam Edwards, obviously. I'm the editor at bearingarms.com, also the host of the Bearing Arms Cam and Company podcast, which you can find on all the major podcast platforms, YouTube and Rumble as well. And I've been covering the Second Amendment on a daily basis since 2004. So going on 18 years now, which has given me a lot of time to study the media and how they cover the Second Amendment. That's what I'm supposed to talk about. So let's do that. The media sucks when it comes to covering the Second Amendment. Thanks for coming to my Cam Talk. I'm being told that I have more time. So yeah, let's elaborate on that thought. Actually, so what's interesting is over the past year or so, there actually has been a changing dynamic to some degree in terms of how the media covers the Second Amendment. And for the purposes of this talk, let's note too that when I talk about the media, I'm not talking about pro-2A media. I'm not talking about, Ammo Land or Bearing Arms or Truth About Guns or The Reload. There are a lot of really great resources for gun owners out there. But unfortunately, a lot of the mainstream media outlets from, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, even Fox on occasion, I think they have a much different, not only attitude, but they've got a much different skill set when it comes to reporting on Second Amendment issues. Most of the reporters in the columnists who are opining about Second Amendment issues aren't gun owners themselves. They don't live in places that are amenable to the exercise of the right to keep and bear arms. And frankly, they don't support, for the most part, the right to keep and bear arms. So they bring all of that baggage with them to the table. What's changed over the past year is this growing movement on the left, that portions of the left, by the way, are now trying to tamp down, to defund the police, to reimagine policing, to talk about de-incarceration strategies, right? To talk about strategies to fight violent crime that don't involve law enforcement. Well, if you're talking about strategies that don't involve law enforcement and that don't involve policing, for the most part, they also don't involve gun control, because policing is at the heart of the gun control movement. And we're going to get into that in greater specificity in just a moment in terms of how the media is covering this fight within the left. But they are adopting a couple of different strategies to try to do so. First, you've got the folks who are just trying to ignore that this is even taking place, right? They don't want to talk about the new gun owners, millions of new gun owners over the past year and a half, many of them not conservative, many of them buying firearms in places that try very hard to restrict the exercise of the Second Amendment. And so you will see columnists and reporters, mostly columnists though, just ignore this phenomena. They just want to bury their head in the sand, pretend it doesn't exist. Then there's the strategy I think is more widely adopted by reporters to minimize what we're seeing. The New York Times, for instance, ran a big story about the rise of black gun ownership a few months ago. But the New York Times was very, very careful not to advance the idea that perhaps these new gun owners could spell trouble for the gun control movement. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. When the news media tends to report on a story about the rise in new gun ownership or the changing face of gun ownership in this country, I think they try very, very hard to find new gun owners who also still support gun control. If they can find somebody who just bought a handgun but still wants to ban large capacity magazines, for example, or somebody who just bought a shotgun for home defense but says, yeah, we should definitely ban those scary black rifles. The media loves that. That's their favorite type of gun owner. The gun owner who actually still supports restrictions on the right to keep and bear arms. And certainly those gun owners are out there. But I don't think that those gun owners tell the entire story, right? You even see this strategy among gun control activists themselves. In the Washington Post not long ago, a pair of gun control activists associated with Moms Demand Action ended up writing a piece. The headline, DC knows how to stop most gun violence, but it's a long and difficult task. The authors, Rachel Uzdan, the executive director of Peace for DC, former DC chapter leader of Moms Demand Action, Roger Marmot, whose son Tom was murdered in DC in 2018. He's the founder of Peace for DC. He's an Everytown for Gun Safety Survivor Fellow. He is also the city gun violence lead for Moms Demand Action's DC chapter. So you would think, with a pair of ardent gun control advocates writing a piece at the Washington Post about how to fight violent crime in Washington, D.C., that gun control actually would have been the primary thrust of their op-ed. It was not. In fact, gun control was barely mentioned. And I mean that, barely mentioned. This is it. For far too long, they write, our city's solution to, quote, public safety has been over-policing and over-incarcerating black and brown people. This does not stop the violence. This leads to deep trust of police, reduced homicide closure rates, and erosion of communities as funding is monopolized by police at the expense of housing, food, education, jobs, and health. Holding violent offenders accountable is critical, and police have a role to play. But police alone cannot make communities safe, they write. Though DC's gun laws are strong, our borders are porous, and guns are brought into our city from other states. It's imperative that we push for common sense gun laws, but the gun is the final instrument. We need to go much deeper to address the root causes. And that's it. That's the only mention of gun control in that entire op-ed. Now, why are gun control advocates and why are some in the media now starting to pivot, not away from gun control, but at least away from talking about it? Again, I think it's because there's an inherent contradiction between criminal justice reform, depolicing, de-incarceration, and the gun control movement, which is based entirely on policing, right? If your idea is to put more gun laws on the books, well, how do those laws get enforced? By law enforcement officers. Right, exactly. We know this. Heck, even gun control advocates know this, which is why they don't want to talk about it. Because the bottom line is that the gun control movement is sort of the bastard stepchild of politics right now. It doesn't have an inherent home. It's certainly not welcome on the right, because conservatives have, for the most part, embraced the right to keep and bear arms. But it is increasingly unwelcome on the left as well, because the left is increasingly embracing policies that lead to de-incarceration, that lead to depolicing, that don't involve law enforcement. And that puts gun control activists and their media allies in a very uncomfortable position. This is why you have gun grabbers like Shannon Watts proclaiming that police violence is gun violence, even though she wants to see more laws on the books that are enforced by police, right? They don't want to deal with that contradiction. And so instead, they just try to gloss over it, right? They're not backing away from their support for gun control legislation. They're not saying we were wrong to call for bans on guns and bans on magazines and creating more nonviolent possessory offenses out of the right to keep and bear arms. They would never admit that they were wrong in doing that because they still want to do it. But they recognize at this moment in time, if they want to stay in the good graces of the left, they can't really highlight their anti-gun legislative agenda, the gun control laws that they want to put on the books. And so they'll use the media, like they use the op-ed pages of the Washington Post, to just, kind of wave aside, we need common sense gun laws, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about these, root causes. Where, by the way, I think common ground can actually be found between folks like the authors of this op-ed and gun owners like myself. I have no problem. Look, as somebody who's covered this issue, again, on a daily basis for almost 2 decades, I'm well aware that there are programs out there that can reduce violent crime that don't involve putting new gun laws on the books. I write about them quite a bit at Bearing Arms. So yeah, there is, I think, common ground to be found, but it's not common ground that's going to be found in confiscating firearms or even in licensing gun owners, trying to register the firearms that they own. We're never going to be in agreement on that. And at the moment, anyway, gun control advocates are not willing to drop their support for these types of policies, even though these types of policies are responsible for the over-policing and the over-incarceration that these gun control advocates complain about. So they're going to continue to try to use the media to advance their narrative. It's just that their narrative is shifting a little bit because gun control is becoming less popular, even on the left. Now, that, I think, is a very, very positive development. I don't know that it's going to be a permanent development, but it is certainly the case at the moment. And we have a really good opportunity now to press our case. Not only the constitutional case against gun control, but the pragmatic case against gun control. There was recently a brief filed in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin case, the case that's challenging New York's carry laws. And this brief was filed on behalf of public defenders and legal aid attorneys, and they point out the disparate outcomes in enforcement of New York's gun control laws. How 96%, in 2020, 96% of those individuals who were stopped and frisked and ultimately arrested for simply carrying a firearm without a license were not white. Now, the white population of New York City is far more than 4%. It's far more than 40%. It's about 70% of the city. And yet, the vast majority of individuals who are arrested for these nonviolent possessory offenses are not white. These public defenders point out the racial disparity in these gun control laws. And meanwhile, you've got gun control advocates complaining about over-policing and the damage that's done to black and brown communities without acknowledging it's their laws that are doing the damage. I'd like to see that argument in the Washington Post or the New York Times. It's nice that we're seeing it at the Supreme Court, but I would like to see that argument get out there in the media as well. But again, that's up to us. It's not up to gun control advocates to acknowledge their failures. It's up to us to point them out. So I would encourage you, use your own media platforms, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, but don't be afraid to write a letter to the editor. Don't be afraid to write a guest column and submit it. They might not run it, but if they don't, again, there are plenty of other outlets that will run your piece. Might not have the reach that it would in the Washington Post or the New York Times, but you can still have an impact. The most important thing that we can do, I believe right now, in terms of helping the media, I won't even say play it straight, because I think the media is beyond playing it straight when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms. But I do think the most important thing that we can do when it comes to at least trying to find some semblance of balance in media coverage is to be engaged, to be informed, to be outspoken, and to make these arguments ourselves. If we do that, they might try to dismiss the arguments. They might try to bury their head in the sand. They might try to ignore them completely. Might try to say our arguments don't matter. But frankly, those responses aren't very good. We've got the better argument. They may have the louder megaphone, but we can still make our voices heard in this current media environment. And as long as we, again, continue to do that and to advance the cause of liberty, to fight for our civil rights for all of the people, I think that not only are we on the right side of history, but I think we're going to be on the winning side of this issue. So stay in the fight. And thank you very much again for being a Second Amendment supporter. It's great to have you as an ally. I'd encourage you to check out bearingarms.com for Second Amendment news and information each and every weekday. Bearing Arms Cam and Company as well. But most importantly, use your voice in defense of your rights.
Hey everybody, welcome to GRPC. My name is Lee Williams. Some of you may know me better as the Gun Writer. I'm the chief editor of the Second Amendment Foundation's Investigative Journalism Project. You know, I've worn a lot of hats in my life: soldier, police officer, investigative reporter, newspaper editor. But I got to tell you, this is definitely the funnest. I'm having more fun now than I ever had, and it's an honor to be here. And thank you for listening to what I've got to say for a couple minutes. The mission of the Investigative Journalism Project is to showcase underreported stories and debunk misinformation from the mainstream media and other opponents of the right to keep and bear arms. We do this through daily reporting, investigations, analysis, and commentary on policy, politics, culture, and the business of guns in America. You can see all of our work at saf.org or on my new website, which I co-founded along with Mark Walters, who's on the SAF board, armedamericannews.com. But everything we do is carried by a wide variety of pro-gun websites. And at this point, I'd like to thank the first two guys who really stepped up and helped us get the word out. That'd be Freddie at AmmoLand and Dan at The Truth About Guns. Without their help, we wouldn't be able to have gotten our message out to folks, and that's very appreciated. To date, we have produced more than 30 pro-gun stories since we were founded more than 5 months ago. Some of the best work and my favorite work includes the following. Right out of the chute, we were able to fact-check Joe Biden during his first joint address to Congress, and we found out that pretty much at that point, everything he said about guns was either manipulative, revisionist, or an outright lie, and he's continued to do so. Joe doesn't let the facts get in the way of anything he wants to say that's anti-gun. We had a fun opinion piece about Englishmen who denounced our Second Amendment rights. The guy was a famous author. And this was followed by a story about another Brit who's living in Florida now, a U.S. citizen. And he's running to replace Congressman Vern Buchanan, who has had a few anti-gun votes lately. And I was able to go out to the range with this second Brit for his very first time firing a gun. It was a fun time. We were the first to break the national news about the Second Amendment sanctuary movement, which the media has still to this day continues to downplay. They were citing this number that there are 400 counties in the United States that have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries. That couldn't be more wrong. Right now, the number is more than 1,600, and more than 61% of all counties in the United States are Second Amendment sanctuaries. Either they self-declared or they're in states that have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries. By the end of the year, we predict that there will be 75% of all counties in the United States will have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries, far more than the 400 that the media uses in stories to this day. In a story we did called Red Flagged at 14, we told this terrible tale about Eli Paganson, who was a kid in California going to high school who just liked to read about guns and World War II and draw guns. He was into gaming. Well, the school officials red flagged him and told him he was going to be a school shooter, and they kicked him out. And the story looks at what happened to Eli and the horrible effect that this had on his life to this day. Now he's an adult, he's 23, he's a licensed security guard, he goes to the range, he exposes his friends to the shooting sports, he's a good man, but it still took a toll on him. Terrible toll, these red flags have. We showed how New Jersey Attorney General, in another story, Gubrir Grewal, is using undercover detectives to entrap people from other states. He nailed a mom and pop gun shop in Florida. One of these undercover quote unquote detectives ordered a couple of standard capacity AR mags and they shipped into him. Now the General Grewal is trying to extort about $100,000 out of this little gun shop for selling mags that are of course legal in all the free states. In what is probably the most important story for me as a veteran, we told a story about stolen valor, and this story was done through a partnership with the Guardians of the Green Beret. The Guardians are an incredible group. They're all retired Special Forces fellas. Most of them are living near Fort Bragg. They go around the country exposing and outing fake Green Berets. That's all they do, and they're very, very good at it. They came to us with the tale about Blaine Campbell, who is chairman and president of Chi-Tac USA. They're a long-range weapon manufacturer. And with the Guardians' help, we were able to show how Mr. Campbell was never in Special Forces, never had an 18 Bravo MOS, never went to scuba school, never went to Halo, never even finished Special Forces qualification course or the Q course, unlike what he had told a lot of his colleagues and would-be customers. I'd like to thank the Guardians of the Green Beret for coming to us with that information and working it out with us. In a story that really angered a lot of taxpayers, we showed how the Brady Bunch, or the Brady Center for whatever they're called now, has taken more than $1 million from taxpayers through the COVID bailouts. And we showed how another group, the Giffords, had taken a couple $100,000. I should point out that the Second Amendment Foundation has never taken a single COVID bailout dollar and never will. I'd like to thank the ATF for making it possible for me to write a column calling on Congress to abolish the ATF. They helped us tremendously, the ATF did. The story chronicled their foibles over the years, Ruby Ridge and, of course, Waco, and showed how the administration is weaponizing them now for even more harm to gun owners. A lot of stories we did, of course, were about Joe Biden's nominee for ATF, the little fella that is David Chipman. And just like ATF, Chipman is helping making those stories possible, too, because he is, what he is. And I'll just leave that at that. We also debunked Joe Biden's claim that rogue gun dealers were causing huge upticks in violent crime in 5 major cities, which just happen to be all run by Democrats. Joe was saying how these rogue gun dealers will sell or transfer a firearm to somebody without running a background check, or they'll transfer a firearm to somebody who's a prohibited person, which we all know is a bunch of crap. I have a lot of friends, as I'm sure most of you do, who are licensed federal firearms dealers, who would never risk their livelihood, their family, and probably federal prison by transferring a weapon to somebody who cannot have one. Through this story, I sent a FOIA request, or Freedom of Information request, to the ATF, seeking the names of all these bad gun dealers who have been disciplined for transferring firearms without background checks or to prohibited persons, or failing to cooperate with ATF during a tracing request. I'm sure when I get that FOIA request, and I'm still waiting for it, they'll have probably a half dozen names, if that. One of the most important stories we did is we revealed how Bloomberg's anti-gun activists working at the Trace, which is the propaganda arm of Bloomberg's anti-gun empire, are now writing stories and editing stories for USA Today. We showed how they worked on a special project and how the newspaper, despite its highly touted ethical policies, allowed activists to write and edit the stories that appeared in print in USA Today in violation of what we found to be about 5 of their ethical guidelines. One of the stories that really hit home was one we did on the Gun Violence Archive. It's this self-anointed group of folks who claim that they track and trace all the mass shootings in this country. For example, in 2019, they said there were 417 mass shootings. And the FBI, which has a much better definition of what a mass shooting is, says there were 30. I mean, think about that 417 number. If that was actually true, all CNN and MSLSD would be running from one mass shooting to another. The problem was their definition, which our story pointed out, is any time 4 people are shot, they don't even have to be killed. The Gun Violence Archive considered that to be a mass shooting. The FBI won't. They'll rule anything out that's gun-related or drug-related or domestic violence-related, but the Gun Violence Archive will call that a mass shooting, even though that's not what most Americans picture when they hear the term. In a story that we called Rise of an American Secret Police, we detailed how the U.S. Capitol Police is perhaps the most opaque police department in the country. Yet they're coming to you. They want to open field offices in California and Florida, and more states are coming because they say that's where the biggest threat to Congress is. Now, the U.S. Capitol Police, they don't disclose anything to the public. They believe because they work for Congress, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who are not subject to federal FOIA requirements, that they too are not subject to any kind of transparency like the FOIA was meant to bring. We also showed how the U.S. Capitol Police don't publish any annual reports, any arrest data or stats, or even the investigations of their own inspector general. They're incredibly opaque, incredibly secret police department, and they want to open up in the states. We were also first to break the news that the Motor City madman, terrible Ted Nugent, had resigned from the board of NRA. This was kind of personal since Ted, that was the first concert I ever went to when I was a young man. I think it was his Scream Dream tour around 1980, if that dates me. It was kind of fun. We do manage to put out national news on quite a few occasions, and none of this would be possible without the support from you. We need your support. And if you can donate, all you need to do is go to one of our stories. There are links to a donate page at the bottom, or you can go to find one at saf.org. We're kind of member supported. We can't do anything without your help. I guess we're kind of like PBS in that way, but trust me, that's about the only thing we have in common with PBS. Anyway, thanks for your time. Have a great GRPC. And if you ever need to reach me, I put my cell phone out there with a tip or some advice. You can give me a call. That's 941-284-8553. Again, that's 941-284-8553. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.
Hi, I'm Mark Walters, host of Armed American Radio, Armed American Radio's Daily Defense, co-founder of Armed American News, and a very proud member of the board of directors of the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. As such, from that perspective, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to this year's virtual Gun Rights Policy Conference. I know while we can't get together, I know a lot of us are wanting to do that, and I'm sure we will in the near future. At least we can gather here virtually and bring the talk about gun rights to a virtual audience and probably reach a lot more people than we could if we were in a hotel conference center, quite frankly. I've got the media perspective is my topic every year. And usually, most of you who have seen me speak here know that I generally wait for somebody to throw me something, a thought that comes to somebody. It just comes to me. This year, that didn't happen for the first time in many years. Why? Well, actually, I guess I could say it did happen. There were just too many of them. Let me put it in that perspective. There were too many things coming at me to really focus on. So I'm glad they gave me some bullet points in this one, and I'm actually going to follow those bullet points this year that were handed to me. And my topic of discussion today is defining 2A moments. Media. Most of you who know me know that I hate the media. I think they're treasonous. I think many of them should be locked up, thrown in jail for the damage that they are doing to this country, both physically and to the psyche of the nation. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But I'll start here with those topics that were given to me because it does lead down that path. From my perspective, what was the most important 2A story in the last year? No doubt in my mind, the election of Joe Biden as president. Joe Biden ran what I believe to be, and I think you'll probably agree with me, the most anti-gun presidential campaign in American history, at least that I can recall in my lifetime. Joe Biden made no bones about it on the campaign trail that he was coming after your guns and that he was going to blame you as a gun owner for crime in every single Democrat city across the country. We're going to kind of go back to that in just a second as well when we talk about that narrative. But no doubt Joe Biden's election, he made it very clear, not only in the Democrat Party platform, but also on his own website. And if you, to this day, go back and look or search Joe Biden plan to end gun violence, you will find that website with a litany of talking points on it, page and a half to 2 pages deep, where Joe Biden makes very clear when he winds up through all of his talking points that he is talking about confiscation of your firearms. That's not coming from me, but that's coming from his very own website when he talks about a buyback. We all know what a buyback means when you're a Democrat who hates guns. That's called forced confiscation, and it's right there for you on the webpage. So to me, that's the most important story. Second to that, on the board, why is media coverage important to the 2A movement? Where can it improve? Well, I'll tell you why it's important, because when you have a media that is so far in the tank for the leftists, for the progressive, gun-hating, establishment gun haters. And when I say establishment gun haters, I mean Michael Bloomberg's, Everytown for Gun Safety, the Giffords organizations, the Brady campaign, you know who they are. But they're all in bed in lockstep with the administration and their talking points. Hence, for example, the nomination of David Shipman, an active gun grabber on the payroll of the Giffords campaign by the administration, working with all of these other groups and the media to provide that narrative. This is the danger that we face. That's why media coverage is so important to the Second Amendment, and here's where we get into that narrative, because that's how those narratives are created. They frame them today, and the media does their bidding for them in the talking points, and the talking points are gun safety, reducing gun violence, gun safety measures, and we hear some pretty big names out there. Some people that are hard to go up against in the terms of Fred Guttenberg, for example, who lost his daughter at Parkland. On the other hand, we have Andrew Pollock, who also lost a daughter at Parkland, who doesn't join that same narrative. But these people are powerful. They have a ton of money behind them like never before, and they are all using the mainstream media to do their bidding. That right there is incredibly dangerous. And when that narrative forms, that anti-gun narrative forms, let's talk quickly about how that happens. For example, can you imagine if the mainstream media opened every single broadcast with a happy ending story, meaning a good guy using a firearm to defend his or herself? These are compelling, incredible human interest stories that unfold thousands of times a day across the nation. And the mainstream media, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSDNC, Fox, CNN, LOL, and the rest of them, very rarely carry them. From time to time, Fox will cover one of them. But Fox is in the same boat they are. I don't have time to get into that discussion. But nevertheless, these are stories we never see told across the country. Imagine if the mainstream press began covering those stories. A 73-year-old grandma today is alive because of the actions of her 12-year-old grandson who used the family shotgun to kill 2 attackers. That's an actual true story. You would think that that would lead the news in America, and I would venture to say that there was a time in this country that stories like that would have, but they don't today. And because they don't, through that lie of omission, we get nothing but the negative. Now, here's where it can improve. Us, you, we're fighting back. Places like Armed American Radio, Armed American Radio's Daily Defense, Gun Talk, Arms Room Radio, and other places. Stephen Gutowski's The Reload, my own company's Armed American News. These are all outlets that are now picking up steam and gaining traction across the country and are hard to ignore. Something else that's very hard to ignore were the mainstream media. I wish I had more time with you. I could go on and on about this for several hours. But something else that's hard to ignore, the mainstream media is beginning to jump on the fact that these are Democrat-controlled cities where the vast majority of crime is skyrocketing across the country. That is starting to come out. And because that's coming out, Americans are on to what's happening. And they're on to what's happening in large part because of us, because of you, because of our movement. We are beginning to change that narrative. And it's an uphill battle, there's no question about it. But we are beginning to change that. And as we continue to change that narrative, we will continue to win. Some of the other topics, where can people go for news? I just mentioned a few of them, and I would suggest you go to all of them. Support every radio program, every podcast out there that you can find. Get involved. When I say get involved, I talk about this every year. How do you do it? What do you do when you come up against a network like ABC? Let me give you an example of ABC creating a narrative in their bogus series, One Nation Under Fire, which, by the way, ought to be called One Democrat City After Another Under Fire, because that's where the crime is occurring. And they know it. And they do talk about the big cities, but they didn't mention Democrat. They're getting there. They're getting close. We'll continue to force them to tell you the truth. But as they were going through the quote-unquote number of shootings, using the Gun Violence Archive rather than the FBI's numbers, Gun Violence Archive, a left-wing outfit, a nonprofit, as they're using those figures and those numbers, ABC showed the video of a self-defense shooting of a man and a woman standing outside waiting for a ride as they were jumped by three people, one waiting in a vehicle, two jump out with guns. The individual who was being attacked pulled his own gun and put it to him and shot the two who hobbled away like the losers that they are. ABC News never told you that that was a self-defense shooting, a lawful self-defense shooting. They let you believe and let the audience believe that that was gun violence on the streets of America rather than calling it what it was, a self-defense shooting. This is how these narratives that we're talking about are created. So what do? You visit all of the pro-gun sites that you can, and I just gave you a list of them. And of course, I'm biased. Armed American News has got you covered. Armed American Radio, Armed American Radio's Daily Defense, Tom Gresham's Gun Talk, Arms Room Radio, Eye on the Target Radio, all the podcasts that you can go to, everything. Please visit the Second Amendment Foundation. Join us. We're all in this fight together. And if you want to know where I consume my media, unfortunately, I have to watch them all, and I can't stand it. It drives me nuts. I'm not fun to be around in them after I do my daily perusing of all the morning shows. But thank you for being here today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And please understand this, that freedom, although it's an uphill battle, freedom will always prevail. I believe that in my heart. This country is facing some very difficult times now. It took us 245 years to get here, but people like you will help us get out of it. That's a promise. Freedom will prevail in America today. I'm Mark Walters. I'll see each and every one of you on the radio. Enjoy the rest of the conference.